England in 1528, where luxury coexists with incredible squalor. King Henry VIII rules the country, hosting lavish feasts featuring hundreds of exquisite dishes. But behind the beautiful facades of the palaces lies the grim reality of everyday life. Our channel invites you to immerse yourself in the world of smells, tastes, and diseases of the Tudor era. Today, we'll find out what actually ended up on the plates of 16th century people. In those days, food was not just a source of energy, but a real lottery for survival. The lack of basic hygiene concepts turned every meal into a deadly risk. People were unaware of the existence of bacteria, viruses, and germs. They sincerely believed that diseases arose from bad odors or an imbalance of bodily fluids. That is why their culinary habits seem utterly insane to us today. The typical London air consisted of a mixture of smoke, sewage, and rotting garbage. This heavy scent permeated all the food sold in open markets. Meat sat on the counters for days on end, attracting swarms of green flies. Shoppers paid no attention to the faint stench, considering it perfectly normal. The only way to salvage such food was to cook it for a long time with plenty of hot spices. If you're eating or drinking right now, you might want to put your plate down for a moment. A description of Tudor feasts could spoil the appetite of even the most hardy viewer. But it is precisely these details that make history truly come alive and feel tangible. We must understand the trials our distant ancestors' stomachs endured. Welcome to the harsh England of 1528. In 1528, London was a cramped and incredibly filthy city. The streets were poorly paved and turned into impassable swamps after rain. Residents dumped slop and the contents of chamber pots directly from their windows onto the pavement. There was no sewer system, so waste flowed through open ditches straight into the Thames. The stench in the city was so thick that an unaccustomed person could easily faint. The meat markets were a sight not for the faint of heart or the squeamish. Animals were slaughtered right on the streets, and hot blood flowed into open drains. Offal that could not be sold was simply left to rot on the roadside. Stray dogs and pigs roamed the city, feeding on these foul-smelling, slimy remains. In the summer, the heat accelerated the decay, creating an unbearable atmosphere around the market stalls. The smell of rotten meat clung stubbornly to the clothes and hair of every passerby. Food vendors used a variety of cunning tricks to deceive their customers. To mask the smell of rotten fish, they sprinkled it generously with cheap, pungent spices. Spoiled meat was cooked in a thick onion sauce that masked the taste of rot. Poultry on the counters was often dabbed with fresh blood to make it look as if it had been recently slaughtered. The townspeople knew about these tricks, but they had practically no choice. Milk was considered a very dangerous and incredibly perishable product in the city. Cows were kept in filthy barns right within the cramped city walls. Milkmaids didn't wash their hands, and milk pails were simply rinsed with murky river water. Street food was hugely popular among poor workers and apprentices. Vendors carried hot meat pies through all of London's crowded intersections. The attitude toward hand hygiene in the markets today is a real culture shock. A vendor might first gut a pig and then use those same hands to cut off a piece of bread. Money, covered in grease and dirt, constantly passed from hand to hand among the townspeople. The concept of disinfection did not exist even in the most advanced medical treatises. People sincerely believed that a strong immune system and prayer would protect them from any infectious diseases. In such appalling conditions, smells served as a sort of compass for survival. People sniffed every morsel, trying to determine just how fresh it really was. Spices were valued as highly as pure gold, not only for their flavor, but also as an excellent cover-up. Black pepper, cloves, and nutmeg masked the bitter truth about the quality of London's food. Tudor food always smelled very spicy to drown out the repulsive stench of decay. In 16th century England, water was considered a drink for the most desperate of the poor. The River Thames served as both a source of drinking water and London's main sewer. All the liquid and solid waste from the huge, densely populated city was dumped into it around the clock. Artisans poured toxic dyes, tannins, and caustic acids into the river. Drinking such liquid without boiling it for a long time meant signing one's own death warrant from an intestinal infection. Doctors of the Tudor era strongly recommended avoiding the consumption of clean drinking water. They believed that cold water chilled the stomach and severely hindered normal digestion. In their authoritative opinion, moisture contributed to a dangerous accumulation of harmful mucus in the human body. Therefore, doctors advised drinking water only in cases of extreme necessity or intense heat. It is ironic that this medical misconception actually served as a lifesaver for all English people. Avoiding dirty water did indeed save their lives, reliably protecting them from cholera and dysentery epidemics. The main and absolutely safe drink for all segments of the population, without exception, was ale. During the brewing process, river water was boiled for a long time with barley malt. The high temperature reliably killed all deadly bacteria, microbes, and active pathogens. The alcohol inevitably present in the beverage served as an additional, very powerful biological preservative. Ale did not spoil as quickly as plain water and could be stored for long periods in cellars. Wealthy nobles preferred to drink wine, which was brought in large barrels from France or Spain. Wine was also a relatively safe drink, as natural acids and alcohol killed bacteria. However, merchants often brazenly adulterated the wine by diluting it with dirty harbour water. To mask the sour, stale taste of old wine, honey, sugar, and herbs were generously added to it. Hot red wine with spices, called Hippocrates, was generally considered very beneficial and medicinal. Keeping water in its pure, pristine state was practically an impossible task for sailors. Drinking water was stored in wooden barrels or large sewn leather wineskins. In a warm, humid environment, microorganisms multiplied rapidly, quickly covering the walls with a slippery green film. Within a couple of days, such water acquired a sharp, musty odor and a disgusting, swampy taste. Surprisingly, the habit of drinking alcohol en masse instead of water literally saved the nation from complete extinction. Thick, hearty ale served not only as a pleasant drink, but also as a very important part of the daily diet. It was rich in B vitamins, live yeast, and essential carbohydrates. For poor, weary peasants, a large mug of ale often replaced a full hot meal right in the field. So alcohol, which is rightly considered harmful today, was a true liquid bread in the 16th century. In the harsh Tudor era, fresh, steaming meat was considered a tremendous luxury and a striking indicator of wealth. There were no electric refrigerators, so a slaughtered animal had to be butchered and processed immediately. In late autumn, there was a mass slaughter of livestock, as feeding the animals through the long winter was too expensive. An incredibly hectic time ensued when the entire household was busy urgently preparing meat for storage. The main and most reliable weapon in the fight against inevitable decay was ordinary coarse salt. Salting was a physically demanding and chemically harsh process for the cook's hands. The meat was rubbed generously and at length with coarse rock salt, which effectively drew all the moisture out of it. The pieces were packed tightly into huge wooden barrels, where they lay for months in their own brine. Such salted beef became incredibly tough and required a very long soaking before any cooking. But even this did not guarantee complete food safety. The salt could be distributed quite unevenly in the barrel. Deep within particularly large pieces, the process of imperceptible but extremely dangerous internal decay often began. Hot or cold smoking was the second most popular method for preserving valuable meat for the winter. Pork legs and gutted fish were hung high under the ceiling, directly above the large kitchen hearth. Thick, acrid smoke slowly permeated the food, killing surface bacteria and repelling voracious insects. The smoked meats hung there for months on end, gradually becoming covered in a thick layer of black, greasy kitchen soot. Before eating, This hard, dirty crust had to be scraped off for a very long time with a large, sharp knife. However, the acrid smoke and salt could not completely protect the provisions from very voracious small pests. Kitchen meat flies were a real curse and scourge of any sturdy Tudor household. They easily penetrated the pantries through any window cracks and laid their eggs in the deep folds of the meat. It was a common occurrence for a kitchen maid to discover a hoard of white maggots on an expensive smoked ham. The spoiled meat was not thrown away, but the infected part was simply cut out deeply, and the remainder was doused generously with sour vinegar. In huge, wealthy monasteries and noble houses, special deep underground ice houses were built to store food. During harsh winters, huge transparent blocks of ice were cut from frozen rivers and lowered into deep brick cellars. The ice was carefully layered with dry straw, and it could remain completely unfrozen until the very end of the hot English August. But such complex architectural structures were few and far between compared to the rest of the vast country. The average city dweller had to rely solely on an oak barrel of brine and thick wood smoke. The battle against rot was a daily, exhausting, and often utterly futile struggle for the family's survival. Spoiled, toxic food killed the English no less frequently than the very frequent and bloody military conflicts. Eating rotten meat inevitably led to the most severe diarrhea, which rapidly drained all vitality. The body became completely dehydrated in just a couple of days, and the unfortunate sick person died in terrible agony. The grim reality was that every hearty supper could be the last for a Tudor Briton. Bread was the absolute and indisputable staple of the daily diet for every resident of 16th century England. However, its taste and quality depended entirely on the buyer's social status and the size of their wallet. The king and the nobility ate what was known as market bread, a magnificent white loaf made from finely sifted pure wheat flour. The poor usually made do with coarse dark bread, baked from cheap rye, barley, oats, or even fodder peas. But a hidden deadly danger lurked in absolutely any bread, regardless of its noble colour and high cost. The process of grinding grain in old stone village mills was incredibly far from the modern technological ideal. Heavy stone millstones inevitably wore down over time, leaving fine but very sharp stone grit in the flour. In addition, ordinary river sand, clumps of dirt, and small pebbles straight from the muddy field often found their way into the sacks. Lazy bakers did not bother with the long and careful sifting of low and mid-grade cheap flours. Chewing such coarse bread was always accompanied by a characteristic and very unpleasant crunch of stone against the teeth. This hard stone dust constantly acted like sandpaper, irreversibly and painfully destroying human tooth enamel. Storing baked bread in the damp British climate also posed a huge and constant household problem. Soft, fresh loaves were very quickly covered with a thick, fluffy layer of multicolored, incredibly toxic mold. As with meat, this mold was simply roughly scraped off, and the remaining crumb was safely fed to family members. Old bread, dried out to the consistency of hard rock, was absolutely never thrown in the trash. It was soaked for a long time in warm beer or hot soup so that it could at least be chewed. Interestingly, old, stale bread was actively and constantly used as a kind of disposable tableware. In wealthy noble households, thick square or round pieces were neatly cut from yesterday's dense loaves. These pieces were called trenchers, and generous portions of fatty roasted meat were served directly on them. The bread greedily soaked up all the meat juices and thick sauces during the long, hours-long Tudor feasts. At the very end of the meal, these meat crusts, soaked in grime and grease, were handed out to hungry beggars at the castle gates. Although bakers were strictly regulated by royal law, they still found clever ways to cheat. They secretly mixed crushed chalk or white clay into the bread dough to make the finished bread appear lighter in colour and more expensive. For brazenly cheating poor customers, a baker could be cruelly tied to a pillory right in the main city square. Despite the very harsh public punishments, the eternal thirst for profit forced London merchants to take risks every day. It was absolutely impossible to trust the quality of the expensive bread you bought, even in the city's most prestigious shops. A large daily loaf of bread was a symbol of life, but all too often it brought long and agonizing suffering. It mercilessly ruined teeth with river sand, slowly poisoned the body with fungi, and clogged the intestines with coarse sawdust. In the Tudor era, even the well-known prayer, "Give us this day our daily bread," was uttered with profound inner anxiety. People sincerely asked God not just for food, but for safe, filling food that wouldn't accidentally kill them. It was an incredibly cruel gastronomic lottery that every Englishman played during breakfast. The Tudor main kitchen in a large castle or palace was a veritable industrial enterprise. It was a gigantic, noisy room with incredibly high stone ceilings, completely blackened by thick, greasy soot. The heat here was absolutely unbearable, especially during the long summer months, when fires blazed in all the ovens around the clock. Ventilation came only through small windows and the wide flues of the huge, perpetually smoking stone hearths. The air was always incredibly thick, very humid, and filled to the brim with the smells of burnt animal fat and spilled blood. Cookware was washed extremely rarely and very superficially, using only coarse river sand for cleaning. Grease accumulated in an incredibly thick, sticky layer on the walls of copper pans and large cast iron pots. When poorly maintained, copper has the insidious tendency to oxidize, releasing a toxic green patina onto the surface. Head chefs prepared sour wine sauces directly in such cookware, which inevitably led to severe acute copper poisoning. Sudden nausea and severe vomiting after a lavish feast were considered perfectly normal among high-ranking guests. These obvious symptoms of copper poisoning were often mistaken for the first signs of deliberate criminal poisoning with poisons. A huge, constant problem in medieval kitchens was the dim lighting during the dark hours of the night. They used cheap, homemade tallow candles made from smelly, low-quality animal fat. They smoked incredibly heavily, smelled extremely unpleasant, and very often dripped hot, dirty fat directly onto uncovered food. In the dim, flickering light, tired cooks could not spot small bits of stone or white maggots in the porridge in time. Many visual defects in the food were also quite successfully concealed in the dim light of the huge banquet halls, illuminated by smoky torches. The festive menu for King Henry VIII was prepared under conditions of the strictest secrecy and absolute political paranoia. Every finished dish was always checked by special trusted individuals for the presence of possible deadly political poisons. Court tasters carefully sampled the food before it even reached the powerful monarch's lavish table. However, this royal inspection did not protect anyone in the palace from the ever-present bacteria and deadly intestinal infections. The dirty hands of an ordinary servant carrying a dish from the kitchen to the hall posed a much greater and very real threat. To create their exquisite banquet dishes, the cooks used an incredible variety of poultry every day. Plucking thousands of dead birds created a constant, suffocating cloud of fine down in the kitchen. The light down easily found its way into the workers' lungs, quickly causing severe asthma attacks and a chronic, exhausting cough. The warm blood of the slaughtered game dripped directly onto the dirty stone floor, where it mixed with mucus and trampled food scraps. The pungent smell in such a confined space could easily cause a modern, unprepared person to lose consciousness instantly. The Tudor kitchen was a veritable factory of invisible pain, acrid sweat, and hidden, dangerous gastronomic threats. Exquisite, fragile castles of sugar and gilded roasted peacocks were created by the worn hands of incredibly exhausted people. The insane, suffocating heat, filth, and toxic fumes made the cook's work an incredibly harmful and dangerous profession. Many ordinary kitchen workers quickly went blind from the smoke or died in agony from occupational lung diseases. A magnificent, lavish feast in the palace was always generously paid for with the lost health of those poor souls who remained by the blazing hearth. most common, unpleasant, and completely hidden consequence of the Tudor diet was intestinal parasites. Almost every living person of that harsh era carried a whole writhing zoo of worms in their long intestines. Archaeologists today study the remains of ancient city toilets and find millions of fossilized eggs of round, dangerous worms there. Roundworms and tenacious whipworms were incredibly faithful companions to both the poorest peasants and the most noble lords. Infection occurred constantly and absolutely everywhere due to the complete lack of the basic habit of washing hands before eating. For small children, the presence of worms was often fatal and very quickly led to a painful, agonizing death. Clumps of huge, intertwined roundworms could cause complete physical blockage of a child's incredibly fragile small intestine. The unfortunate child could not eat, suffered constantly from severe, sharp pains, and died agonizingly from the rupture of internal organs. Frightened mothers tried to feed their crying infants milk mixed with dirty ash, naively hoping to drive out the evil, invisible spirits of the disease. The very high infant mortality rate in that era was perceived as something absolutely inevitable and entirely natural. Numerous parasites were easily transmitted from person to person due to the incredible overcrowding in shared family beds. In filthy inns, weary travelers slept several to a bed on a single large hard straw mattress. Fleas, biting bedbugs, and lice moved freely from one dirty, sweaty body to another. By scratching itchy bites with very dirty fingernails, people carried invisible worm eggs right into their own mouths. It was absolutely impossible to break this endless, dreadful cycle of infection without boiled clean water and good soap. Even the mighty King Henry VIII was completely unable to protect himself from these invisible, vile enemies. It is known that the great monarch suffered greatly from frequent and incredibly painful digestive problems. His personal, highly paid physicians regularly and thoroughly examined the king's excretions, trying to make at least some kind of correct diagnosis. His enormous daily consumption of meat and complete lack of vegetable fiber created the perfect environment for voracious parasites. The king desperately took special medicinal powders made from crushed pearls, which were absolutely and completely useless. Enormous wealth and power provided absolutely no immunity against common, filthy intestinal infections. Microscopic, invisible parasites, always present in any stagnant river water, also caused immense harm to health. Insidious giardia and amoebas caused chronic bloody diarrhea, which quickly reduced people to the state of living skeletons. A person could completely waste away in just a few long months from dehydration and the absolute depletion of vital energy. Such emaciated patients were often, and completely unjustly, considered cursed or victims of evil village witchcraft. Instead of proper medical treatment, they might be subjected to strange purification rituals or dangerous, exhausting bloodletting. Living with constant nagging stomach pain was the absolute norm for people in the harsh 16th century. The concept of easy and comfortable digestion simply did not exist in that harsh and filthy Tudor reality. People had grown accustomed to loud rumbling, sharp cramps, and frequent nausea, considering these to be normal bodily functions. Huge parasites feasted silently and heartily within the bodies of the very people who had built the great and mighty British Empire. It was a completely invisible and constant war raging inside every person, a war they were quietly losing day in and day out. The danger during a sumptuous meal came not only from the questionable, rotten, and frankly spoiled food. The utensils used to bring the prepared food directly into the mouth posed a threat no less serious, though completely hidden. The nobility and wealthy merchants took immense pride in their incredibly beautiful, heavy, and expensive pewter tableware. Pure tin looked like genuine silver, shone brightly in the light, and signaled the high status of the host. But this popular alloy often contained up to 40% pure and incredibly toxic lead. Lead is an incredibly insidious heavy metal that has the terrifying property of slowly accumulating in the human body. The Tudors' rich diet was full of very acidic, expensive foods, wine vinegar, wine, and very acidic fruit sauces. The natural acid instantly entered into an imperceptible chemical reaction with the smooth metal surfaces of the beautiful, shiny plates. During meals, the toxic lead dissolved into the meat sauce and entered the stomachs of all the diners completely unhindered. Day after day, year after year, the aristocrats very slowly and surely poisoned themselves right at their own tables. The disease built up completely unnoticed until the neurological consequences became completely irreversible and absolutely fatal. Peasant wooden dishes were never washed with hot water and expensive soap due to the urgent need to conserve scarce firewood. The bowls were simply scraped clean with a knife and hastily wiped down with a bundle of coarse, dirty straw or an old grey rag. An old wooden plate in the house always smelled of rancid fat and very sour, spoiled, sour milk. Using someone else's poorly washed bowl in a cheap tavern guaranteed the spread of cold sores and dangerous stomach infections. It was precisely through such dirty communal dishes that terrifying outbreaks of dysentery spread very rapidly in crowded cities. Among the common people, this incredibly dreadful disease was aptly called bloody diarrhea, from which there was absolutely no escape. Another incredibly strange feature of banquets was the near total absence of individual cutlery. In England in 1528, forks were considered a downright devilish and overly feminine foreign invention. People ate hot food with their hands, actively helping themselves with a piece of bread or their own sharp hunting dagger. Before a hearty meal, hands were washed in a communal bowl of warm pink water, which was a purely formal gesture. Dozens of well-dressed guests dipped their very dirty fingers into the same small silver bowl. The expensive salt cellars on the long tables were also shared and usually consisted of an incredibly large open bowl. Guests took white salt by the pinch, casually dipping their unwashed, damp fingers right into the precious white mound. Thick manuals on court etiquette specifically prescribed a strict prohibition against dipping gnawed meat into the communal salt. But in practice, especially after a few cups of strong wine, these rules were forgotten incredibly quickly and easily. The dirty saliva of sick people very quickly found its way into the expensive spices, instantly infecting all the other participants in the feast. Shared large wine cups were another incredibly effective and reliable way to transmit any dangerous infections. A huge cup was always passed around as a sign of special trust and sincere friendship. Each guest took a large sip from it, leaving traces of saliva, food, and their own bacteria on the rim. The terrible epidemic of the mysterious English sweating fever was transmitted with alarming frequency precisely during such communal feasts. This disease inevitably killed a perfectly healthy person within just a few long hours after the first appearance of its dreadful symptoms. A Tudor feast was always an invisible minefield of heavy metals and highly contagious foreign saliva. The luxurious appearance of the gilded goblets reliably concealed an incredibly slow but inevitable chemical death. Strict etiquette insisted on sharing food and drink, which completely contradicted all sensible rules of survival. Attending a grand banquet was a very important social obligation that was absolutely impossible to refuse, and people obediently went to the feast, meekly and joyfully accepting poison from very beautiful, dangerous leaden tableware. The daily diet of different social classes during the harsh Tudor era differed in an incredibly radical and frightening way. The elite of society suffered greatly from diseases of absolute abundance and the excessive consumption of incredibly harmful foods. The lavish tables of wealthy aristocrats were almost entirely devoid of vegetables, which were considered coarse food for dirty, poor peasants. Lords consumed enormous quantities of incredibly heavy meat daily, washing it down copiously with very sweet, strong wine. The complete lack of vitamin C quickly led to the rich falling ill en masse with severe, deadly scurvy. The dreadful scurvy mercilessly ravaged the bodies of the most powerful and wealthy people in the English kingdom of that time. Their gums bled constantly, their teeth fell out, and very old wounds suddenly reopened and began to fester severely. Their skin was covered with terrible black bruises, even from the slightest careless touch or very light blow. Due to the incredible abundance of protein and a complete lack of fiber, the nobility constantly suffered from the most severe constipation. Foolish doctors always tried to treat this with copious bloodletting, which only immediately finished off the patient's weakened body. Enormous wealth literally and very methodically killed its owners, right through their own incredibly exquisite plates. Infant mortality was always absolutely catastrophic across all strata of Tudor English society, without exception. Even within the protected royal family, only a tiny fraction of all healthy heirs to the English throne survived. Hired wet nurses very often unknowingly transmitted infectious diseases to delicate infants through breast milk and their very dirty hands. During the difficult period of weaning, children were suddenly fed soft breadcrumbs soaked in strong ale. The weak, incredibly delicate children's stomachs could not cope at all with such an incredibly heavy and terrifying bacterial load. In the tragic end, death did not discriminate at all regarding from which specific dish its next unfortunate wealthy victim had eaten. The poor died en masse from terrible starvation, massive parasites, toxic ergot, and incredibly severe physical exhaustion. The wealthy quickly perished from dangerous lead poisoning, agonizing gout, severe obesity, and complete blockage of blood vessels by harmful cholesterol. Severe obesity was by no means the norm back then, but it was a common occurrence among very wealthy older people. The absolute lack of proper science and medicine meant that the chances of survival in the event of any serious acute illness were negligible. Any survival in England during the harsh 16th century can incredibly boldly be called an absolute miracle of robust human physiology. People's immune systems always operated at the absolute limit of their capabilities from the very earliest day of their lives. They were born, loved wholeheartedly, and tenaciously built a great country, constantly living in an incredibly toxic and dangerous environment. The entire Tudor diet was an incredibly slow-acting, deadly poison, which they consumed with great, sincere pleasure. The only difference lay in just how incredibly expensive this absolutely deadly and very dangerous meal was. The Tudor era left behind incredibly magnificent castles and very beautiful formal portraits of powerful monarchs. But now you know exactly what was really hidden behind the heavy brocade robes and luxurious, expensive royal banquets. Everyday life in 1528 was a constant, relentless struggle against an invisible biological threat. Every piece of roasted meat, every sip of murky water carried a very real risk of a torturous, excruciating death. The people of that harsh era possessed an incredible, astonishing resilience that we can only vaguely imagine today. The dark, harsh reality of hygiene and dangerous cooking practices forever changes our modern perception of romantic, thick historical novels. Beautiful, noble knights suffered immensely from massive worms and lost most of their teeth early on due to river sand. Today, we must pay immense tribute to the amazing, astonishing resilience of the entire human body and its unique natural adaptation. Our incredibly resilient ancestors drank dirty, murky beer, ate completely rotten meat, and yet somehow managed to survive. Despite everything, they were able to leave behind healthy offspring, thanks to whom absolutely all of us in the modern world exist at all. A deep study of history helps us permanently remove the rose-colored glasses from any romantic view of our past. Human touch, a keen sense of smell, and a sharp sense of taste can tell us far more about ancient people than boring dry dates ever could. Real history is not just about the great battles of kings, but also about what the dirty markets of London actually smelled like. It is a complete and clear understanding of why a single loaf of bread could so easily drive an entire village mad. It is precisely these shocking everyday details that make all those distant centuries incredibly vivid and truly terrifyingly alive. And with that, our eerie tour of the foul-smelling streets and incredibly luxurious banquet halls comes to a complete end. Always take care of your precious health. Be sure to wash your hands thoroughly before eating, and always store food safely in the cold. Sincerely appreciate the fact that you have constant access to absolutely safe and very tasty food every single day.